Welcome to the Inside Out Money Podcast.
Can't even recognize this place. Too many pieces of our past mistakes.
Hi, I'm Maggie, and I believe real change starts from the inside out. So let's work together to improve our money and our lives from the inside out. We will explore all things money and our relationship with it. Join me each week with a rotating set of co-hosts, friends, and interviews. Let's jump in.
It's time, we going round and round and round and round and round.
Hey, Greg.
Hey, Maggie.
We're living the American dream, yeah?
Are we?
I don't know. That sounded rehearsed, didn't it? Well, it's not. Okay. Welcome to Inside Out Money. This is a personal finance podcast focused on redefining wealth from the inside out. Every week, I speak with somebody, a rotating set of somebodies, also known as co-hosts, about a different financial topic focused on helping you improve your financial mindset and tactics. Today, we have officially my favorite co-host, because I'm married to him, Greg. And we're talking about the American dream, what it is, if we're redefining it, if we even have a proper understanding of what it is. And this is a topic I've wanted to do for a while, but more recently, I've heard the term brought up a lot.
It's very relevant timing.
Yeah, why?
Yeah. Well, because of the election.
I wasn't sure if you read the show notes or would you have come up with that on your own?
Well, it was in the article that we listened to and prepped for this.
Yes.
So.
Well, in fairness, this topic came up before you saw that article. Yeah. Did you notice that it's been brought up in the...
No, because I don't watch the debates.
Oh, that's right. That's right. Greg doesn't like watching the debate. Yeah, actually, Greg, you're very politically minded. And
well, yeah, because debates aren't politics. They're stunts and shows where people get up there and they're not real... Yeah. It's not the real act of governing. It's people... getting up there and trashing each other.
Okay, well, my
point, spectacle.
That's fair. My point was you follow politics way more closely than I do, but you refuse to watch the debates. And I don't really like following politics, but I also like watching the debates, probably because they're spectacle. It's like watching a reality TV and I'm like, well, I don't want to miss it. I feel like I need to know what happened just to be alive in the world right now. And you'll read articles afterwards about it versus watching the spectacle itself. So anyways, the point is the term American dream has been brought up by all candidates, VP and presidential candidates, in the debates and in a lot of topics and interviews. And it is a very popular, common term to quote the American dream. It is actually one of the most searched topics on Investopedia. And I thought I had a pretty good, in my head, I had an understanding of what it was. And I wanted to do this topic about it. And it's funny, I was talking to Greg about it. We were in the car the other day. And then Greg's understanding, which to be clear, yours is probably more accurate than mine. But Greg's understanding of I don't know why I'm saying Greg, because you're sitting right here. Your understanding of the American dream was very different, not very, but subtly in an important way different than mine. And I was like, well, okay, well that changes the topic. And I was like, well, let's just let's first off just talk about what the American dream is. And then we can talk about if it's evolved or what our view of it is.
I think that it's a really good discussion. The discussion we started having in the car kind of feeds into this episode. When you thought of the American dream, and it's probably subjective when you said mine is probably the right, I don't know that there is a right one. I mean, historically, we can point back to how it originated, but what was your view of the American dream when you thought of it?
Yeah, so that's a good question. And I don't know I had to just take my shirt off because I'm getting kind of hot talking about this topic. I'm just kidding. I always get hot when I'm recording podcasts. You'll often hear Liz reference that I'm in a sports bra recording. Anyways, just took a moment to get really ready to discuss the American dream. So my view of the American dream in my head was always some level of success beyond the basics, if you will.
Beyond the average, maybe?
Yeah, beyond average, right? And so in my head, when I was a kid, I had a very, what I would consider average to probably by the book, above average middle class upbringing. But I looked at, friends around me whose their family went on like international vacations and drove nicer cars. And like, so to me, the American dream was like some level of success where like I didn't have to worry about money, you know? And like there were times when my parents stressed about money, you know, not that they were going to like lose their house, but just, you know, how they might pay for an unexpected expense, or, you know, if camp was expensive or something like that. And so my view of the American dream, I think, was like success in a way that I didn't have to worry about money. I had enough of it to not stress about
So
it.
financial independence, maybe.
Well, I didn't
something.
know that.
You didn't know the term.
Actually,
but
that's how I would describe it now. But at the time, I just thought a big house, nice
Yeah.
cars, fancy vacations. Like, and I even when I was like in my 20s thought I want to own a beach house, like things I don't even want to do anymore. But I just thought it was this like certain level of success well beyond average.
Yeah.
What did you think?
When you shared that, I immediately said, well, that's not how I've interpreted. I've always felt like it's probably relative to different people, but that the American dream was not necessarily some level of opulence or status, but that the American dream was really the ability to raise your family, be, you know, financially secure, not necessarily independent, but have financial security, be able to have the things needed in life to raise a family, to, you know, have your own property. I mean, I think property, maybe not huge fancy properties, but home ownership has kind of been traditionally a part of the American dream, and hence the fact that you can deduct interest on your income tax. You know, there's always been this push towards home ownership. But I didn't view it as a high level of wealth. I just viewed it as a level of financial stability.
Yeah.
And especially given that our country was, you know, had people from all financial backgrounds, and it represented upward mobility.
Yeah.
And maybe not mobility towards this high level of wealth, but upward mobility is kind of how I always viewed it.
Yeah. So like most things in life, you're like, I mean, I appreciate you saying there's no right or wrong, but like you often have a better interpretation of the facts of something, or like a better memory and, you know, recollection of like what that formal definition of something is, versus I've sort of, you know, made up some version of it in my head over the years, and it's evolved. And so
there's a saying, sorry to...
Oh my gosh, there's a saying in my family.
Yes. And
it's a motto. It's been called a motto.
A motto.
Actually.
And
yeah.
I mean, Maggie probably is like, you know, I think these things get a little less bad with
Like
each
each
generation.
generation gets a
It's a
little
little
better.
less, but
Yeah.
it's seldom right, never in doubt. And really just referring that the women in Maggie's family, they may not know the answer, but they believe
They'll act like they know it.
they know it.
Yeah. And it's not just like my mom, it's like her sisters. And,
There's never a, you know, I think this could be
or
what
let me
this
go
means.
Google it.
Yeah.
They'll just, even if they don't know, they'll just answer it. And I'm like, do you know that? Did you just like make that up? And I have to like fact check my mom all the time. And then then Greg catches me doing the same thing. And like, you know, like he said, it might get a little better. Each generation. What is it? I always misquote the motto also, because I'm always like seldom wrong, but it's actually
I
seldom
believe
right.
it's seldom right, never in doubt.
Seldom right, never in doubt. But I kind of like seldom wrong, sometimes in doubt. But that's not it either. Okay, back to the American dream, Greg. Let's stay on topic here. You're always getting us off topic. You know, we both had our like views of what we thought it was. Yours is definitely like more rooted in reality as usual. Here's some quotes I'm going to read about the history and the kind of concept of where the term American dream came from, because it's actually kind of interesting.
It is,
And
yeah.
There's a bunch of information about the American dream. We're just going to kind of read through some of it. The roots of the American dream trace back to the goals and aspirations of the first European settlers and colonizers who came to North America seeking escape from tyranny, religious persecution, and poverty. So the Declaration of Independence, drafted in 1776, eloquently captured their reasons for coming. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So these words have resonated throughout American history and been cited by various groups seeking equal standing in American society. Many people believe that, you know, the roots of the American dream go all the way back to the Declaration of Independence. And then the specific term, the American dream, was popularized during the Great Depression by James Truslow Adams. And it originally emphasized the idea that anyone, regardless of their background, could achieve success through hard work, which again is kind of I think more in line with like the way you were thinking about it, right? Like a sense of upward mobility, which we'll talk about more, and just the idea of being able to kind of go from potentially nothing to something in terms of, some level of security with hard work, regardless of your background, that you could achieve success through hard work, which I love just the concept of that in general, because I certainly was instilled with that belief myself as a kid and teenager and young adult. Yeah, it makes sense to me.
So based on that, it really seems that the American dream is not solely about material wealth or possessions. According to James Truslow Adams, who you just mentioned, he coined the phrase in his book, The Epic of America. And he said the American dream is more profound than just material wealth or possessions. He described it, quote, not a dream of motor cars and high wages merely, but a dream of social order in which each person can attain their fullest potential, regardless of their circumstances of birth or position. So in other words, it's about aspiring to be one's best self and rising above kind of where one was born, emphasizing personal growth and recognition beyond material gains. And really, very much harkens back to those three things you said and that are in the Declaration of Independence: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
I do like that he specifically nods to, a recognition that the American dream is not just about material wealth or possessions, because that to me is more kind of what I thought it was about. Again, never necessarily intended, but just my own, kind of evolving of thinking or making up what I thought it was over the years versus where it's even in my mind, changed for me. More about kind of the history of it. And this is a quote from an article about the American dream. Despite this optimism, Adams also warned of flaws in the American way of life. He specifically highlighted the dangers of unbridled capitalism and mass consumption, where workers might find themselves on a treadmill of earning, not for enjoyment, but merely to spend, benefiting factory owners. The American dream therefore encompasses both opportunity and responsibility, emphasizing the pursuit of individual potential while acknowledging societal challenges. I love these like really old recognitions, like, hundreds of years ago recognitions, or in this case,
90 something years ago.
Well,
but yeah.
yeah.
But yeah, I mean, pretty like astute
of
observation for what is very much the case now.
Yeah, think how much has even changed since then and how much more modern our society is now. But even then, that there were warnings about the dangers of unbridled capitalism and mass consumption. And that was
90 something
years ago, right? Yeah. And so then another quote from this, and we'll end our history lesson soon here. But in summary, the American dream symbolizes the promise of opportunity, freedom, and equality for those who work hard and have the will to succeed, transcending mere material wealth and encompassing personal growth and fulfillment. So traditionally, it was all about achieving upward mobility, owning a home, attaining a better life through hard work, determination. But really, it represents the idea that anyone, regardless of their birthplace or social class, can achieve their own version of success in a society where upward mobility is possible for everyone. And rather than relying on chance, the American dream is believed to be attainable through sacrifice, risk-taking, and hard work. And the roots of it lie in goals and aspirations to achieve something. In that regard, I think it's a very timeless concept. By the way, that was the end of the history lesson and shifting to the present day and Greg and I sharing our thoughts. But I think learning about the history of something to me is so interesting. And I'm, a lot of this stuff I feel like I learned in school, but it was, 20, 30 years ago. And I don't have a good recall for, a lot of those things I learned and read about decades ago. And so I love relearning some of these things because it is the concept of the American dream, it's a timeless concept. The idea that, you want to have goals and aspirations, you want to focus on achieving something. But to me, what I think is kind of evolving is what, at least for me and for you and me, Greg, I think what I want to achieve has evolved a lot. Back to my original understanding of thinking that the American dream was all about some upper level of financial success and having all of the, quote, trappings that go with that. It is, the way it was intended is less about that, and it's about, any type of success and how you define that. To me, I was originally thinking, my view of the American dream has evolved so much in the last 20 years. I used to think I wanted I used to think I wanted a beach house, and I used to think I wanted fancier things than I actually want in life, and that would make me happy, and that would be me achieving some level of success. And again, with that was my pursuit of happiness, if you will. And now I don't think that anymore. Like, what I truly believe will make me happy, I think has changed so much. Though ironically, a lot of risk taking and sacrifice and hard work, it took me a lot of that to get to the realization of what I actually wanted in many ways.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. And I think the general perception of what the American dream is an interesting thought. And we'll talk a little bit about an article that ponders what is the American dream and what does it cost. And it's really interesting because I do think that whether you call it the American dream or not, what people aspire to has become very affected by marketing and mass consumption. And every ad we see tells us that we're only going to be happy with a certain level of car, certain clothes, certain luxuries around us. And to me, that's very different even than where our parents were in the 80s. I think if you looked at the houses that people lived in the 80s versus the house that someone wants to live in now, most people want more house than they ever need.
Yeah.
And it's just an interesting thing. And at the same time, it's getting harder for many people to even achieve what is that more grounded version of the American dream. I mean, there are people who are working 3 jobs who still can't, much less the big house, they're struggling to find any financial security.
Yeah.
So it's a very interesting thing where you've got advertisers and this view pulling the American, what is thought of to be the American dream into this fancy, higher level of material possession. And yet, for many people, it's getting harder and harder to chase that. So that's what's about politics. That's my little political thing for the day, or soapbox, is that I think that what is the American dream, and is this more grounded version of it even achievable for many, many Americans? And we obviously won't solve that today, but it's just an interesting thing to think about and talk through.
Yeah, and so we had already planned on doing this episode, and kind of, roughly had some thoughts on what we wanted to talk about. And then Greg forwarded me this article that I thought read, but actually just saw, and was like, it had the word American Dream in the title, so he sent it to me.
And then when Maggie said, "Oh, this is good," then I said, "Okay, now I'll read it."
I was like, it's worth reading. I mean, it was worth reading because we were doing a topic on this. Okay, so it was a USA Today article. I'll put a link in the show notes to it. The article was called "Dream On, the American Dream Now Costs $4.4 million over a lifetime." And it was talking about an actual report that was done that tried to estimate what quote the American dream cost. But what I thought was interesting about it was, first off, because there were like a few things I wanted to quote from it, and I just was on my phone and didn't feel like moving to a computer, I was like, oh, I'm going to print this out. And I really don't like printing things out. I'm like very frugal about our printer ink, as you might imagine, based on the way I am about many things. And so I went to print it out, and it's like a 2 or 3 page article. It was 16 pages. It was going to be 16 pages worth of printout because of all the ads in it. So I just thought it was ironic that like this American Dream ad is so chocked full of ads, which is what's working against anyone actually achieving the American dream, is our capitalistic and consumeristic society that we live in, which is ironically funding our early retirement, right? Like the market doing so well is what's allowing people like you and I, Greg, to be early retired. And so you've pointed out the irony of that before. And I don't even know if irony is the right word for that, because it's not really funny, but anyway, so this article is interesting, and like a few things that just a few quotes from the article. So it says like the American dream is attainable, according to a financial advisor, especially for a family with 2 earners and good savings habits. And so I just think that's interesting where they, first off, they're pointing out like it's a lot more attainable with 2 earners in your family, and you got to have good savings habits, which obviously I think is, incredibly important. So Investopedia actually set out to put a price on it, and they priced it at $4.4 million. And you can go look at the article. They actually break down how they got to that total of like how much of it is kids is like almost $1 million of it, by the way. But how much of it is like your home, your kids, pets, cars, vacations,
New cars.
new cars.
Is in the
Yeah.
2024 reports.
Well, what's interesting is, so there was like an older report that had a number that was like it was only a year old, but it was like 3 point something million. And it actually focused more on like what they'd call needs, which was like a home, a car, health insurance, retirement funds. But then the new report has things like not just a car, but a new car, and not just retirement, but like a comfortable retirement. And then stuff like vacations and kids and pets. And so that is sort of my point on like, or well, both of our points perhaps on like, it's constantly increasing, right? Like what was once considered kind of, perhaps we could use the term the American dream, is getting more and more expensive because not just inflation, but our needs versus wants have changed and evolved pretty significantly. And actually, that's kind of one of the points that I was noticing about myself is my wants and needs are perhaps getting smaller than they once were when I was younger in life, right? They're minimizing, but society at large's needs and wants are getting more expensive, right? Needs are getting more expensive just because of inflation, and then wants are getting more expensive because of the capitalistic society we live in.
There's more wants.
Yeah, there's more. Yes, there's more wants. I mean, it's because of how society is evolving. So it's because of how we're being marketed to. It's because, right, we truly want more. It's not that, people, my parents didn't necessarily want less in theory. They had less thrown in their face because there wasn't social media. They weren't constantly in front of a computer that was throwing ads at them. Literally, when I like try to go read an article, I get thrown, 12 pages worth of ads. And so it is a very different time. And so it's interesting because they kind of like, sometimes you read things like this and you're like, well, what's the point of this? And like, it's interesting how they even summarize the point of their own article. And so a couple of thoughts. They say like readers can leverage the report to write their own plan for achieving the American dream, which is fair. And then it also says perhaps this American dream report, which the article is talking about, will encourage some readers to find a life partner. So,
Yeah, that was interesting.
that was interesting. Mainly because of the life gets cheaper with two people, right? You don't even need a life partner, really. You need a roommate, right? And so then it says, the document should inspire readers to save and invest. I totally agree. And then also it says, a quote from somebody actually in Atlanta says, key takeaway from this report is the importance of having a comprehensive financial plan. The downside is that the numbers may depress and discourage people, which I talk about all the time on like, look, the reality of like, I think everyone should know and track their net worth. And in the beginning, those numbers might depress and discourage people, but ultimately they push you on the path towards doing better, and what gets measured gets improved. And then you can start to actually create some financial goals and some level of how you want to improve your personal finances. And so anyways, this article was interesting, and it was like interesting timing to read it.
So what I did like about the article is I thought it was interesting how it put some financial numbers to certain aspects of the dream. It said pets was $37,000, and it said that was like one dog and one cat or something like that, and how expensive pets can be. And I thought that was kind of interesting. And then it had a number for kids and and I just liked that it sort of put some numbers out there.
Yeah.
And then it said, but this doesn't have to be, in essence, not in these words, that doesn't have to be your dream. Your dream is tailor this information to your dream.
You might not want kids. You might not want to travel. You might not value new cars.
So I thought it was nice that it wasn't trying to say this should be your American dream. It was more, this is what it could look like.
Yeah.
And to that point, as we talk about the American dream, we've talked a lot about kind of the pressure, the consumerism pressure to expand that dream to bigger things. But there's many things in the opposite direction. Minimalism and the FIRE movement, and people trying to find a simple yet fulfilling life. And so I think it's interesting to talk a little bit about that as well.
Yeah, I mean, Greg, that is a great point. And that is definitely what initially attracted me to the FIRE movement in the first place, into financial independence, is I was having all of these shifts and evolutions of how I was thinking about what was important in my life. And I was, in a job, doing well, making great money, arguably happy in, many aspects. I had, met you, we had a lovely family, very happy, but like recognizing that this isn't what was creating my happiness, was this treadmill I was on. And I was really very, for a while, super obsessed with the idea of minimalism and having less. And it wasn't even a financial thing. It was a state of overwhelm that was pushing me towards it. And a recognition, and I was reading a lot about Buddhism, and a recognition of what I truly needed to be happy, and an appreciation for that. And that that starting to kind of like learn and read a lot about that, and then starting to learn about fire. A lot of this was even before you and I met, and a lot of it with the fire piece evolved after we had met. I was just having an appreciation for almost maybe like a maturing of my thinking, but also a bit of, I got a taste of many of the things that I thought were going to make me happy and were, quote, success and the American dream. And, you know, I was making more money than any of my parents ever made combined. I wasn't like happy because of the money, and I could separate that. You know, I was like, you know, if this thing left me tomorrow, if this job left me tomorrow, like I'd be okay, right? And I think I was just having this like maturing in my thinking and realizing that many of the things that I had achieved was not going to bring me lasting happiness. And I was just like, there was just this kind of feeling of overwhelm in the amount of time I had to do the things I wanted to do. And so for me, that was a big kind of evolution in my thinking. Again, regardless of like if my definition or perception of the American dream was even correct, my definition of like happiness was shifting to some extent. And this is, you know, this is like other people's perception of it, but to shift to other people, I thought a really interesting point around kind of the evolution of the idea of the American dream that's changing too is raising a family was always a really big piece of the American dream as it was initially concepted and defined. But more and more people are choosing not to have kids. And that, you know, I looked at the stats of the idea that more and more people are choosing to not have kids. And it's true. I mean, the global birth rate has been steadily declining for a very long time. And to the point where it was like, in 1950, it was around 37.2 births per 1,000 people. And in 2024, it's projected to be 17.3 births per 1,000 people. That's a huge decline, right? And that's the global birth rate. The US birth rate has declined from 24 births per 1,000 people to 12 births per 1,000 people. So I mean, it's cut in half. And what I think is just so interesting about that is, you know, I don't know if that's financially driven. I haven't like dug into all the reasons. I'm sure that's part of the reason, but I think it's also just societally driven of like, you know, again, the kind of general overwhelm of like, you know, time and interest and money and all those things affect your interest, right? Your time and money affect whether you want to bring kids into your life, because they definitely, you got to really want kids, right? Because they're a huge drag on your time and your money and your lifestyle and everything else. And so I just think it's interesting how much different factors are influencing the American dream changing and the idea of just how society is evolving also.
Yeah, I agree. Birth rates are really interesting. And I mean, as countries industrialize and sort of mature, birth rates invariably go down. And you know, you look at China, up until the past 10 or 15 years, they had to limit the birth rate because they had so many births, and now they're the opposite. And, you know, a lot of people are fearful of a declining birth rate, and they say it actually is going to be very bad for the economy as populations level and eventually decrease. And Japan there's a big fear of their upcoming population decrease. So it's kind of interesting, but I think there's a lot of societal change around it. At a micro level, though, it is interesting. And I think there are people that say, you know, I just don't want to have kids and it doesn't fit into my life plan. I think that's great when someone can like recognize that and realize what's important in their life or not. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, it is kind of interesting. There's so much change around what the dream is and what is sort of perceived as success. And I think it's great that there are counter influences to the view of success being more luxury, bigger, better. And that's one thing I've loved about the community within the FIRE movement is that you meet people, and when we do things like Camp FI, the knowledge that's exchanged about the technical piece of it is certainly really, really helpful. But what really gets me excited is just being around other people that may not have the exact same view as me, but have a view that more money, more success is not more happiness. Yeah. That happiness is found through living an intentional life and spending wisely and intentionally. And so I think that's really cool that there are those counter influences to that.
Yeah, I agree. And there's the ones that have influenced us personally, Greg, but there's also just these general, more like macro level influences that have shifted more people towards, I'd say, the way we're thinking about the American dream and how it's kind of evolved for us. And I think it's just interesting to share some of those. I mean, one of them is economic factors. So, right, the rising cost of living, the rising cost of even getting an education and student debt have just made it less attainable for many people to achieve as much financially as they perhaps were able to in, previous times in the world. And so, we alluded to that a little bit at the beginning of like, it is much harder to be able to own a home and often unrealistic and unattainable for many people in a way that it wasn't, for my parents' generation, just as a comparison. So there's also cultural shifts. So there's a growing awareness of environmental and personal cost of consumption with people, which is what is driving many people towards, myself included, and I think both of us included, towards more shifting towards owning less and having less, and the idea of minimalism and things like that. There's also technology shifts. So the rise of tech and the rise of remote work and even just things like digital nomadism makes it a lot easier for people to live and work wherever they want to on their own terms. And so you have all these other things that are also shifting what people think of as success and how they define success and what they're sort of working towards for them to achieve the American dream. I mean, now you've got young people who their idea of the American dream, whether they came up with it on their own or whether these societal shifts push them towards it, is to build out a tiny house and a van and travel around the world, right? And live in like a, very, very small space, but have so much freedom and be able to work from anywhere in the world.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to comment on that related to social media. We've talked about how social media, online marketing, some of the negative impacts of that. But there are influencers out there who are young people who are choosing these other paths and who are living in a van, traveling the world, and who aren't spending their 20s grinding away at corporate soul-sucking jobs. And I think that's cool too. And so again, social media is just this tool, can be used positively or negatively. But there are a lot of people who are going out and doing these really cool things, and they're able to share it in a way that they never could before. And I think that's hopefully very influential to people, seeing that there are alternative paths to happiness.
Yeah, I think we live in a fascinating time in so many ways. I think about, I'm going to sound old saying this, but I just think about how you and I both grew up and the influences we had around us and the voices we had around us and the amount of access we had to information around us even was just so different than what, we're raising 3 girls that are in the 12 to 16 range, and to see them growing up in a very different society. I mean, Greg sees me on a day-to-day basis as a parent, and I'm often I'm pretty trying to get people off phones, and I really don't like screens around kids. And I mean, to be fair, our kids are around plenty of screens, so it's not like they don't have access to that, but I'm very much concerned about its influences and very aware of it. And I'm in the camp of I wish my kids had the childhood I had, quite honestly, because yes, there's such interesting access to information, and it's just such a different time. I'm going to go off on a tangent about raising kids with social media and screens, but there's so many interesting, cool things that come from it. But then there's also, all of these fears and concerns, and you want to put these limits in place. And I do think, the very different time we live in now is what is influencing and creating that evolution of the American dream concept, right? Whether we want it to or not, it's changing how we all feel about things because of all of these societal influences and cultural norms that are different than they were when, we were kids and when we were growing up. And so this is one of those more philosophical topics. And to close it out for everyone in a way where this is actionable for you, I really do think, first off, not every topic has to be actionable, right? It could just be something, interesting that's thought-provoking for you. But in case you want an action point and a little bit of homework, I think it's think about what you really want. We talk a lot about intentionality on this podcast and being very thoughtful and intentional about what you spend your money on. And back to the pets example, if it's we don't have pets, so we don't spend any money on pets, but we spend money on all sorts of things that other people might not value. just think about the process of spending time to think about what really matters to you is incredibly important and time well spent. And so think about what this American dream looks like to you. Cultivate a mindset focused on, well, for me, it's funny, I shouldn't challenge other people. For me, I want to cultivate a mindset focused on freedom and fulfillment instead of material success. And that may not be attractive to you, right? And so decide what is attractive to you and then what actions it will take for you to get there. And I think that's really my challenge to people and why I sometimes find these more philosophical and kind of mindset and psychology-based discussions interesting is because I think it's interesting to like take a step back and really think about, are we on, like for you and me, Greg, like are we on the right path? Do we feel good about the choices we've made? So you need to decide what you want and then what it's going to take for you to get to that. So I know lots of people who like, they don't want to retire early. Awesome. That's cool. Well, then you don't need to save as much, but you can spend a lot more in theory than I can because you plan to work until you're, 65 or 70 or whatever it might be. And so our closing challenge to you is think about what is really important to you. Spend some time being introspective and if you have a partner, talk to your partner about it and let that be an exercise together. Really spend time thinking on it and then letting that drive what you want to focus on from a goal standpoint and from a particularly personal finance standpoint, what some of your financial goals are as a result of that.
Well, to quote Stephen Covey, I think I quote him occasionally on this podcast, but start with the end in mind. So, really think about what is your dream? What is your life that you want to build towards, and then work backwards from there. Figure out what it's going to cost and what you need to do to get there. And I know it's much easier said than done, but it as daunting as it feels when you start, it's definitely worth doing because you can sort of build a roadmap towards that if you know roughly where you want to head. If you have no idea where you're heading, you're just kind of taking turns as they come. Yeah.
And well, I love that quote. And if that's overly daunting to you, one of my favorite books is called Designing Your Life, How to Build a Well-Lived, Joyful Life. And it has like a true roadmap for how to figure out that end in mind, if you will. So, and the roadmap to get there. So if it does feel daunting, go read a book like that to help kind of focus and inspire you. And I'll put a link in the show notes to it. Okay. I think that's it though. I think we have had a nice discussion. We figured out what the American dream is and we've achieved it, Greg. Congratulations.
Nice. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank
Congrats.
you. Thank you. I was half joking. I'm not sure we will ever figure it out. But we appreciate you guys listening. You know what the American dream is, Greg? My American dream is you listener leaving a written review on Apple Podcasts for this. Well, I guess any podcast you like, but it'd be cool if you wanted to do it for this podcast, which is called Inside Out Money. And anyways, we appreciate you listening. And if you want to help us achieve our new American dream, which is to get to 200 reviews by the end of the year, I just made that up. But we would love it if you want to go leave us a review. If you appreciate this podcast and this topic today, we would appreciate it if you would leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. We really, really, really appreciate it.
We also encourage you to share this episode with a friend or family member. Hopefully it will encourage ongoing discussions about money. And you can also subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. If you have any thoughts or questions, we'd love to hear from you. You can leave a voicemail or text us at 404-981-3370 or hit us up on the gram.
Okay. Inside Out, Greg.
All right. Inside Out.
Didn't you make up an ending one time you were like out?
I think I just, what
out
did I
of
say?
Here? No.
I think I just said out.
Out?
I don't know.
Inside out of here. I like that. It's work. It's like, Greg doesn't like any of my shticks. It's going to grow on you soon. Inside out of here, Greg. Okay,
all
bye.
Right, we're out.
Bye. Oh, we're out. That's nice. We're inside out. We're inside out. We'll keep working on this. We're going to workshop this. Okay, bye.
Bye.
I think it's just going to be bye because that's all we can handle. Okay, bye-bye.
That was good.
We going